Good afternoon. My name is Melvin Brown, the Deputy CIO with the Office of Personnel Management. I'm also a part of the FinOps Governing Board, and I run the U.S. Public Sector Special Interest Group. And I'm joined by my colleagues this morning. I'll give them a chance to introduce themselves. Shane.
I'm Shane Leisure, Deputy Chief Information Officer at Christopher Newport University in Newport News, Virginia. I've spent my entire career in higher education IT.
I'm Nick Weber. I'm the Acting Director of the Office of Scientific Computing Services at the National Institutes of Health. I also run our cloud program, otherwise known as STRIDES, a set of partner relationships that we have with Amazon, Microsoft, and Google.
And I'm Rob Martin with the FinOps Foundation. I have the least interesting title among all of us as a FinOps principal at the foundation. We're an organization that supports about 28,000 people who practice FinOps around the world, including a growing number of government organizations, government communities of practice, and the special interest group that you head up.
Thank you, gentlemen. And so, Shane, this question's for you. And as a university, where are you in your cloud journey, and what have been some of your biggest challenges? What brought you to FinOps?
Traditionally, we have a very quote-unquote old-fashioned infrastructure. We have data centers on campus. We have been funded for typically one-time purchases of large compute for specific purposes like our ERP. We are slowly moving to the cloud to diversify some services. Some of the big ones, thanks to the pandemic, we leaned into the cloud to offer services to students and faculty when we went remote. It sort of saved us from the pain of not being able to offer services to students who didn't have access to software to continue their classes. A lot of those led us to try other services, critical services like DNS, web servers, things to allow us to continue. Being in Southeast Virginia, we have these things called hurricanes and tropical storms, and we've been victim to lots of power outages, capital construction for 20 years. It's not uncommon to pull some fiber thinking it's a tree root. And so for those reasons, we leveraged probably what you'd consider the minimum cloud presence. And so now here we are in 2024, we're thinking about major challenges like ERP modernization, research computing, and leveraging cloud for those things. So I'm here as much to learn as to participate in what ways we can ensure that we're going about this journey in the right way with the right governance, the right mindset, the right accountability, and the right partnerships on campus.
So Nick, you're in the public sector, so what does that journey look like to you? Where are you in your journey, and what are some of your biggest challenges?
Yeah, great question. So I'm at the National Institutes of Health. It's 27 institutes and centers that are largely autonomous and have their own kind of budgets and ability to focus on their mission. And that's going to come into play in kind of talking about this STRIDES initiative that we run. But for me, I started at the NIH in 2008, actually as an intern, and my first project was working in cloud in AWS. I still have pictures of the console at that time to compare our on-prem supercomputer to do molecular dynamic simulations and the Amazon cloud. And we looked at billing, we did projections, we did a lot of the things that the folks just talked about on the FinOps side. So I've been pouring through cloud data since 2008. We currently have relationships with all three cloud providers. We do more than $10 million a month in cloud spend across the cloud providers, across NIH and those that we fund as a funding agency. The STRIDES initiative also supports research organizations, academic and medical centers across the country that we fund. And so we have a lot of data, a lot of usage, and across those 27 institutes and centers, it varies on kind of how mature that organization is. So we have central cloud platforms that people build on top of. We try to put some infrastructure as code and other things that they can use to leverage. And we do a lot with billing and cost reporting and therefore FinOps to make sure each of our customers has visibility into their spend and understands how they can optimize. But in terms of challenges, I would say the biggest challenge is trying to hit the scale that we want to hit in terms of adoption of customers across the country, adoption of the institutes and centers at NIH, and to do more with the research dollar with budgets as the situations that they're in and other things. We're always trying to figure out how we can push the envelope as a research and development agency. So that's kind of the 30,000 foot of what we do at NIH in the cloud.
And so, Rob, you're new to FinOps, relatively new anyway. But you represent the foundation, and every year the foundation puts out what they call a state of IT report or a state of FinOps
State
report.
of FinOps report, yeah.
And so what are some of the trends that you're seeing across the enterprise?
So we're, first off, I'll just say, this is why I love working with the government clients, the government customers who are using cloud, just because you can imagine all of the different challenges that you have just as a regular enterprise, but then trying to work within the restrictions of the government and also trying to do these kind of important things that are important for all citizens is really amazing. So thank you for doing that work. It's always really really interesting to see how the State of FinOps report comes out. We're starting our 5th State of FinOps report survey, and those are going out across the world. We're hearing from people in government, but people in every industry and every geography, from every sort of size of company or complexity of company. This year, we saw sort of a continuation of some of the themes that we have seen in the past. There's a really strong focus on cloud waste, on making sure that we're not wasting the resources that we do have in cloud, on controlling those costs overall. But we're also seeing a trend towards the bringing of FinOps back into the higher levels of the organization, into sort of strategic decision making that we're seeing happening. And we're seeing FinOps teams growing beyond what they were originally tasked with, just focusing on public cloud, and also including content and other scopes of spending, licenses and data center spending, as the FinOps job allows the organization to mature their IT footprint overall. So big in the past, there was a really big focus on getting engineers to take action to reduce that waste, and this year we're seeing organizations kind of broadly focused on reducing that waste overall, making a bigger impact to the overall bottom line of the organization.
Good. So Nick, question for you. As you start to think about the changes in technology over the years, how has the cost of cloud or the technology in your organization been impacted, and how do you see FinOps helping you with solve that problem?
Yeah, so cloud has been a huge benefit to enabling us to take on new technologies, and as I mentioned before, push that research envelope. We have a product that we call Cloud Lab that we allow people to come and test out the cloud within our kind of secure authorized environment, kick the tires on the various services, and get $500 to be able to spend over a 90-day period to learn how some of these services work, and try to project out what some of the costs are to do a migration project or an experiment. But we also make use of the cloud marketplaces. So on each cloud platform, they have marketplaces that have third-party tools and products that you can get in a relatively streamlined manner to enable, again, our researchers and our staff to stand up a data platform or do something that may otherwise take 9 to 12 months through a standardized procurement pathway. So I think in terms of cost, it's always a challenge because there's not an unlimited kind of credit card that we can bill against. But I think what we do find is that being transparent with the data that we collect, and the clouds all have great cost and usage, very granular information. There's tools and other things that we provide a lot of show back to customers so they know exactly what they're spending, can make informed decisions as to how they want to move it forward. And then we do have a FinOps specialist dedicated on the team, and also have a cost and usage reporting team. We try to create regular consults, look at our data across the board, as well as within individual customers, to make recommendations on how they could optimize on spend. There's a number of ways to do that, whether it's on reserved instances and virtual machine types, or savings plans, or on down the list. So we try to match and kind of align with customers as they're looking to grow and do more things. Where can we also save some money on how you're doing that to be more cost effective?
So I heard unlimited budgets, and so Shane, I know for a fact at Christopher Newport, you do not have an unlimited budget.
No, sir.
Okay.
Not unless something's changed between this morning and this afternoon.
And so how are you solving the challenges with budget constraints for your cloud resources in your organization?
Very carefully. It is, you talk about the cost of technology in general, and what we're hearing from our colleagues are increases in costs of all the software that we subscribe to. VMware is probably top of mind. Some of our peers are seeing exorbitant increases, and those are things that we try to budget for many years ago. State budget system, much like your experience, is several years ahead of time, and so these sort of surprise costs. If a company changes and decides it changes hands and the cost increases 10, 20, or 30% or more, it can have very serious effects on our budget, and we have to pivot quite quickly. It's caused us to ponder alternate technologies. Being in higher education, we do try to consider some open source solutions. I know that we've got some folks on the team who are looking at alternatives to sort of traditional applications that we've had in the data center. Part of that's also looking at the cloud as a way to pay for just what we need, as opposed to spending a significant amount of money on traditional hardware for what could amount to just a few hours of the year of very intense compute. For something like registration, which we know when that happens in the future. It's cyclical. We work on an academic life cycle. Other things are generating tax returns, quarterly, year-end, things that the financial folks in our business office do. So we try to plan ahead for those. I think the cloud might help us deliver better services in a more timely way, perhaps by not spending so much at one time on a traditional data center infrastructure.
So Rob, my question for you is, as a practitioner and somebody who's had a chance to look at a lot of cloud data, if you're in a multi-cloud environment, just trying to consolidate all that data into one common look and feel so that you can speak consistently with the business. I understand that there's a project that's going on or initiative within the foundation to help clarify that. You want to say a little bit more about that?
I'd love that. So the FinOps Foundation itself is a project of the Linux Foundation, which of course supports big things like Kubernetes and other large open source software projects. And one of the newest projects that we have created is called Focus. That's the FinOps Open Cost and Usage Specification. And it is a common billing standard, essentially, for cloud providers as well as other providers who offer either consumption-based data in their billing data or just static data that you would like to combine and put together so that you can have that kind of consolidated view. This is an area where each of the cloud providers has grown its own format of data. So anyone who's gotten an Azure bill and an AWS bill and a GCP bill and an Oracle bill sees that the fields, the type of data that's provided, the granularity of that data is all very inconsistent. And so Focus is bringing together those vendors as well as SaaS providers and practitioners from huge companies around the world to work on ways that we could bring in a consolidated format. That Focus spec was released in the 1.0 release in June of this year. We expect the 1.1 release will be coming very soon. It's an IP review at the moment, so that's being run as an open source project and will be a free thing to use for anybody who produces a bill, who ingests billing data, who would like to use that kind of format, or who represents that kind of data. So it should be, we do a lot of important things at the FinOps Foundation. This is probably the most important thing that we have done. Hopefully it will create an impact for everybody who's using cloud data to take one of those complicated jobs off your plate and allow you to get to the analysis, get to the analytics, and get to the optimization much more.
And
quickly.
Focus stands again for what? What is it?
The FinOps Open Cost and Usage Specification.
Thank you so much.
So focus.org, finops.focus.org. Focus.finops.org. Holy cow.
I wanted to piggyback on that to say we have adopted Focus, and our FinOps specialist has been applying Focus standards to all of our bills. So we regularly report out every month on things like the amount of research data that's in the cloud, and we have over 1/3 of an exabyte of data in the cloud. So I think it's 368 petabytes or something like that. 1 petabyte is the equivalent of 20 million 4-drawer filing cabinets full of text for 1 petabyte, and we have 368 and growing on those. On the compute side, that's where we found the FinOps Focus standard to be the most impactful, because sometimes people, the different cloud providers may say, well, it's a virtual CPU hour that's compute, or it's a whole CPU hour that is compute, or this service is or isn't under compute. So we've gone back and looked at all of our data over the last 6-8 years and tried to apply it back to the Focus standard so we can actually look and compare to say, where are people doing the most compute? In the past, we were kind of comparing apples and oranges, and would have different graphs that looked like different scales, and once we applied the FinOps, they came into a similar scale and made a lot more sense. So thank you for spearheading that. It's being actively used.
That's beautiful. I love those stories, and this is a standard I think that's particularly well suited for government, because oftentimes the government is procuring cloud through multiple vehicles, through multiple avenues, and through multiple contracts, and it's a way for the government to sort of get that standardized view all in one from no matter who they're buying their cloud from. The European Parliament is already is going to be talking at our conference in a couple of weeks about their use of Focus as the standard way that they're communicating with member countries. So they're pulling cloud data together and doing that kind of reporting in a consistent way as well. We've got other communities around the world, the UK government, the Brazilian government, the Canadian government, also looking at that. And of course, the DoD standard also mentions the use of Focus, their DoD
creating a common language
strategy. Yeah.
You were gonna.
I think it's important to remember that we're in a technology organization and we like technology and we like things and servers in the cloud, but we're not on the journey by ourselves. We have to bring along our folks in procurement, our folks in finance, our CFOs, all of the hard workers in the business office, and folks who pay the bills. And I know I have a lot of colleagues in other higher ed shops who have these staffs embedded in their IT. But for smaller organizations, we're accountable to people who don't live in this world. They just pay bills and they look at spend and they say, you're spending a lot of money in IT. So speaking to the diversity of all of these providers, and it's not going to get any easier in the future, we have to be able to be responsible stewards and say, this is truly how we've spent the money. This is not, we're not doing this to confuse you or obfuscate these costs. So I think that work is truly important for our friends on the number crunching side of the house.
Great point.
So let's switch gears for a second, because we talked a little bit about the mechanics of FinOps and how it works. But let's talk about the adoption for a second and what it takes to get this moving. And so, Shane, to you, what made your executives, or how did you get people on board? What were some of their challenges and skepticisms around FinOps? How did they not figure that this was just a fad or something that was just phasing? What made them get on board? We're
in active conversations about helping people, and some of these are not only just executives, but some of them are our peers, and some of them are our folks in IT themselves, convincing them that the cloud is the future. Some of these are our vendor partners are bringing what's traditionally been something in-house to its end of life, and you have to migrate to the cloud. I probably hear, in our data center, I should back up, we probably run at least 250 virtual machines. And so one of those might be equal to one application. A lot of those vendors are just bringing their old-fashioned on-prem service to its end. You have to move to the cloud. And so these cloud vendors will be, typically it's much more expensive than the one time I bought something in a box and I installed it. And so we're having these conversations trying to understand both the cost and the complexity, not to mention the governance and information security and all of those other things that we'll talk about some other time. But we're actively engaged on trying to understand what those costs are, how to control them, and how to get visibility into all of it, and in terms of what is academic, what's administrative, because all of those pots come from different budgets. So it's very complicated, and again, we're in the early steps of that 1,000-mile journey.
Nick, it was not an OMB mandate. It wasn't something that the White House mandated that you do FinOps. So how did you get everybody on board? How did you go about doing that without it being a mandate from Congress or from OMB?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, NIH is 27 largely independent institutes and centers, and some will be out ahead and piloting things and trying things out, and then coming back to our community of practice and showcasing. So that was a big part of it. We have adopted and are part of the FinOps Foundation, and I subscribe to the notion that FinOps practice will pay for itself. Your investment in a FinOps practice and tool will pay for itself. But we can't just say that, we have to show it. So we do a lot of kind of examples with data to say, here's a current customer, here's kind of their current spend, here's what it is after we applied this, or what it could be if we applied this, to kind of show real world examples of what investing in these optimization practices and just kind of good hygiene of tagging and all those other things can provide to the organization. So it's not, you have to kind of meet people where they are. There's different audiences who need to hear different things about that. So having open communities, like I mentioned, we've done a kind of a public tool evaluation of different FinOps tools that we would use, and looked at requirements and got all of our constituents to kind of weigh in and help us evaluate. So being open and transparent on that has really been helpful. So each of those groups can go and talk to their leadership and make sure that they know that this is going to help us in the long run to be able to implement some of that hygiene that I mentioned.
Rob, from a 30,000-foot view from the foundation's perspective, what are you seeing as some of the key drivers for FinOps adoption based on your experience?
I think we've seen historically FinOps is adopted in a couple different models. Sometimes it's coming from the top down, where leadership is sort of recognizing that there are challenges that cloud brings to the organization, that buying cloud and managing the cost of it is an entirely different thing than running a data center, right? Nobody ever snuck into my data center at the Department of Justice and installed 50,000 computers over the weekend, but that sort of thing happens in the cloud. And so you've got to have a different mindset when you're managing that kind of usage, and especially when you're distributing that out to all of the engineers or product people in your organization. So some CIOs come to that, but let's face it, there's a lot of CIOs who didn't grow up with cloud, who aren't as familiar with the concepts or the terms, and may not have the mind space or the mind model to adapt to that as quickly. In a lot of organizations, FinOps has really grown from the bottom up, from the people who get the cloud bills and say, I'm responsible for now allocating this across the organization. How do I do that? And really driving it from that perspective. So we see both things happening, and the organizations are typically adapting to that. We're seeing them adapting to that now by really distributing that responsibility across your point, Shane, about the different personas being involved in this process, distributing that knowledge or distributing that visibility to what you're spending and what you're using in ways that lets everybody sort of come to the realization, as you said, that, this is something we should really be paying attention to. Mm-hmm. It is something that changes every month, unlike our depreciation in the data center, and it's something that we really need to work together to manage. And we're seeing FinOps organizations successful at that, starting to move that decision making that they need to do earlier and earlier in the process. That lab thing that you were talking about earlier is a great way to just get sort of teams hands-on in the cloud to do Amanda was talking about the challenges with forecasting earlier, being able to build something in a lab environment and see like what does it actually cost to run for an hour, and then use that as an input to your forecasting process. That sort of thing is possible in the cloud, and it's oftentimes not taken advantage of, because you could never do it in the data center before.
That's a valid point. I'm hearing from colleagues who've already gone through the process of ERP modernization, which is a big thing in higher ed now. A lot of us have legacy SIS, HCM, ERP systems in the data center, but obviously the way forward is some of the big names in cloud ERP spending now. But talking to a skeptical leader, those systems open the door to other tools for greater visibility. I heard a university share a story that now that their ERP exists in the cloud, they leverage other Amazon or AWS products and services to basically, I don't want to say outsource, but to leverage a lot more of their institutional research tools in ways that you cannot leverage in the data center. And it's basically all about AI. It's basically letting AI loose on your ERP and then it coming back and doing reporting that's just not possible in the old-fashioned way of what's currently being done now. So to your point about, convincing skeptical folks, I think the opportunities are there to get greater visibility into your data that you're not currently getting.
All right, so let's further that question as it relates to data. And so how could the cost of data, the data from the cloud and the cost, how could that inform the decisions, around products and services, around onboarding? How could that data be used to help skeptics become unskeptical? And then, as we talked about shift left, at ideation when you're thinking about doing something and you want to bring the team in? How does that help with the adoption? Nick, I'll come to you.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we have a lot of spend and a lot of data, and so we try to look at kind of trends of what are some of the things people are using and doing. I talked about the marketplace, so there may be a way that we can set up a private offer with a marketplace vendor, because a lot of people are looking to purchase a service or a software through the cloud marketplaces. So that's been one that's kind of informed our decisions. We do the monthly reports. Every month we do work with our customers to kind of help them project. But I think what ultimately I like to look at is, are we using services that maybe our traditional kind of lift and shift into cloud infrastructure, and are there opportunities for us to move a little bit more up the stack, I say in cloud, to look at platform as a service offerings, so we can have shared kind of middleware infrastructure pieces that different applications that would otherwise have been custom applications look to leverage. So Azure's platform as a service, instead of having 10 different custom apps for our different business processes, can we use something like that? And that, looking at the cloud bills, can see where people are actually kind of currently spending, and we can talk with them. That's open the door for conversation. Talk with them to see, are there platform as a service options? Are there software as a service options? And that's part of our overall strategy, is to say, our migration to cloud is not just to infrastructure as a service. We do want to leverage platform. We do want to have software services and capabilities that gets us less out of the business of kind of managing, whether it's infrastructure in the data center or virtual infrastructure in the cloud, and more focusing our time and effort on the mission. And so I think a lot of the data that we look at is how can we start to get there? How can we start to move higher up the stack and get more value out of our spend toward IT services, so that our researchers can focus really on the research?
Same question.
I think that's really interesting that you talk about platform and software as a service. And like I said before, so many of our vendors now are talking to us about moving to the cloud and the opportunities. And so we're sitting at the table with every other. Higher ed is interesting. It's almost like it's a city unto itself. And so we're not only managing IT spend, but we're faced with everything from security infrastructure and cameras and door access to things like food services, and of course construction and other building modernization and deferred maintenance, and all of these things come together. And so what we're trying to do at least at my university is look at a new strategic plan that's being formed right now, and IT is hopefully going to be able to help them decide on the way forward to support strategic decisions, as opposed to sort of these pockets of, I need an application, may I have a virtual machine? And of course, in the higher ed model, there's no money associated with that. We bear the cost. There might be a one-time spend on the service or the application software, but the shift to the cloud is completely different from our way of traditional thinking and budgeting and planning. So it's an interesting time to think about how that's going to change. And onboarding new programs is looking at, like I said earlier, ERP modernization, looking at this massive shift from the traditional data center to the cloud is very challenging to us, and we're trying to bring together people throughout the institution to sit and think about these things very deeply, as opposed to just asking for something very expensive without knowing what the return is on that big investment.
Yeah.
So Rob, over to you, but I want to put a little spin on the question, just a little bit, in that forecasting has become one of our biggest challenges, at least in the public sector, but not so much on the private sector. But to that end, as we're starting to think about data, and you and I talked about the phases of focus, being able to ingest data, maintain it, and then push it out, the question becomes, how does that data inform decision making going forward with our ability to forecast new applications or new services and products? What are you seeing?
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to the big difference, I think, between the older capital model of buying IT and the newer, more operating expense model of buying clouds and buying things as a service, because you're seeing, I think, an ability that you guys are describing to see the granular data that makes up the big piles of cost, right? As I begin to look at the things that I'm spending money on, I can then make more decisions, better decisions across those if I can see all the pieces that make those up, as opposed to seeing sort of a large number on a spreadsheet pop up and then having to launch an investigation of how to, what is this? What's this giant number, and how do I attribute its cost down? We can oftentimes see what's going into a single application or a single website or a single pot of storage, and then extrapolate from there, right? I've got a better ability to forecast what another website might look like if I were able to compare it to something I've already built or something that I already built in a lab. And so I've got, I think, just a more granular view of what is out there and how I can put those building blocks together. And as I get more mature in that practice, I can then start to make the trade-offs, as you said, between, should I really build this in the cloud, or should I be looking at a SaaS product to do this job for me, right? Focus on the outcome of what am I trying to achieve, and could a SaaS product do that for me in a more economical or higher value way, and still fit into whatever the cost per student supported that I have to work with in my budget. So sort of building that flexibility in with the details gives you the ability, I think, to make more decisions earlier in the process, because of course, sort of like the agile, the old DevOps thing, where if you find a bug in development, it costs you X, but if you find a bug in testing, it costs you 3X. Right. If you find it once it's launched, it's 15 or 20. And that same principle applies to where you're building and deploying your systems. So having that cost in mind, having your engineers or even your product managers understanding and assessing the cost along the way, you can oftentimes pick things that aren't just give me a VM, but it's help me achieve this outcome with the variety of different IT options we have.
So Rob, staying with you, I want to talk a little bit more about adoption, but I want to talk about it from the lens of training. And what are you seeing as it relates to organizations that are successful with their adoption around training and FinOps training? So
I'll admit my bias here is that the FinOps Foundation, of course, offers training and certifications for FinOps practitioners. This was I was lucky to be involved in that from the very beginning and delivered a lot of that training over the years. We've recently done training in a university setting that we're really excited about there. Well, I think that the companies or the organizations that really take this seriously, I think, go into their FinOps practice saying, like, we've got to get a baseline of understanding, right? We've got to include people from all different personas, not just the engineers, but also the finance people and the procurement teams and the leadership and the security folks, people who are going to be working with the FinOps team to understand what it is that we're asking, right? So I'm not coming to you out of the blue and saying, can you please do this? And you're saying to me, I don't even know who you are or what you represent. That kind of broad certification is great, and being able to get like the FinOps certified practitioner certifications and that kind of thing broadly, and train those personas on how to think about cost effectiveness, how to think about cost as a way we're doing this. And then the FinOps teams themselves are getting deeper into the practice now too. And so there are a wide variety of levels of certification that FinOps teams can get into to get better and better. And then they can interact with each other at the foundation and events like these, where you're able to sort of learn from each other, build this community together.
So Nick, over to you. Where are you all in your training journey? What have you accomplished so far, and what's your vision for tomorrow?
Yeah, so we definitely have certified FinOps individual on the team who's been kind of our evangelist and advocate for across the organization, not only on our cloud team, but across the different institutes and centers that I mentioned. We have not done formal training yet, although it's on the kind of on the roadmap. Some of the training that we do is more kind of informal in our community of practice, and people coming in and saying, let's kind of show what we've built. Let's show some of the cost breakout. Let's understand how some of this works. And one of the most effective ways that we've done that is through I consider it a rite of passage for somebody to either kind of fat finger something and have 10x more than they thought and have a bill higher than they thought, or accidentally post their security keys to GitHub and have it be scraped and used in another region or something like that. Once that happens in an organization, you can kind of learn from that organizationally and help the rest of the community understand, okay, these are some best practices, these are some things that you shouldn't do, these are some things that we need to understand about billing alerts, these are what we need to understand about kind of how we put some of these practices in for QA or other things to prevent some of that. So I think there's a lot of kind of hands-on learning, and NIH as an organization, the institutes are very competitive. They all want to be the first to do something and then show it off to the rest of the organization. So we kind of pit them against each other sometimes and say, why don't you come and talk about what you did over here? Why don't you come and talk about what you did over there in our community? And that's a good way to get some of that grassroots informal training as opposed to the standard classroom-based training.
Shane, how are you guys doing on that?
Communities of practice.
Okay.
In higher education, I believe there's a community of practice for everything from the top all the way down to everyday life. And so there are organizations, and I'm going to take what I've experienced and talked about today, both here and before this event, back to the team and look at the organizations that exist throughout higher ed in Virginia and start to ask questions and see what communities of practice are available. We're lucky we have good relationships with folks around campus who have roles to play in this, from finance to procurement, et cetera. And when you're a smallish organization, it truly takes everyone at those levels to participate together. So when I go back, take what I've learned and encourage people to look for those communities because that's where so much happens in higher ed life, is pick up the phone, talk to your peer up the road or across the state and say, what are you doing? And a lot of times it's just bringing awareness that those communities exist where you didn't know before because you were too busy or you just didn't have the need. So
I'll put a plug in for a community like that I found a lot of value in. It includes both higher education and federal government in it. It's called the Internet 2 Cloud Forum for Higher Education. They have a conference every year that I consider my favorite conference that I go to, and it's people who are supporting cloud at their organizations and grappling with these same things. We had a FinOps track at the last Cloud Forum conference, and it was great. So
it's amazing.
Anyone who's public sector or private sector, higher ed, government could consider signing up.
All right, as we move into our final couple of minutes, I do want to give you a chance to be a visionary. You've already established yourself as a trailblazer just by being here, and so I want to give you a chance to, in 5 years from now, where would you want to see Christopher Newport? Where would you want to see NIH? And where would you want to see the foundation as it relates to their FinOps journey?
Fascinating question. Much further along, I want to see us meeting folks, our customers, where they are. So I want to be able to respond to researchers who come to IT and need resources and be confident that what we're reporting and what we're doing for them is true and accurate and fair to both the university leadership, both the researchers and the academic departments. So I think we have a long way to go, but I think we have the path forward.
Say just kind of a baseline fluency on how to think about kind of operational expenses and costs for IT in the cloud, and how to use that information to inform decisions like we talked about. So I would like the more of the organization to kind of appreciate this is how costs accrue, this is how we can see what those costs are and be informed and have visibility on that. Here's how we can use that information to decide how we want to move forward. So that's across the organization, from the front end of those who are creating budgets and kind of making sure we have our investments aligned to those who are actually implementing and building these services or using these services. Just having a higher level of baseline understanding that this is how this all works, and even though it's not there's a lot of data there's a lot of granularity we can get into, but if you understand some core principles, it can really help in the whole organization be more cost conscious and more effective with the dollars that we do have in supporting our mission.
That too.
That too. Rob, final thought.
Thank you for giving me more time to think through an answer for this. I think that the practice of FinOps continues to grow and evolve, right? FinOps is really about three things in my mind. It's about focusing on value, not just cost. It's about making good decisions and making those decisions in a collaborative way. I think those are also, in my mind, the key things that make a good IT leader, right? I think that increasingly we'll probably see current FinOps practitioners moving into operational leadership, into CIO and CTO roles, where they have that natural ability to understand what cost is, what the impact of cost is, as they're doing everything that they're doing, making all the strategic decisions that they need to make And I think that we'll see more of the community. We've got 28,000 people in the community, up from 32 5 years ago. I hope we'll see a million. I don't know. I'm going to go with 1 million people in the FinOps community globally, working on making sure that the decisions we're making in every organization around the world are the best ones. They're the ones that are going to be most impactful, and that have the approval and the collaboration of everybody involved.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and attention, and thank you all for your participation. And now I want to hand it off to Merritt and Jason Marsh. Over to you.